we share a student together. His name is Ray. And when I started working with him, he already was a good poker player. He's not a professional poker player, but he makes a lot of profits with playing satellites and then traveling to live events, playing the live events. I had some students who played satellites, but not that many because people just bought in directly to the tournament. And I heard a rumor before of people who are very good in playing satellites, and they're like, oh, it's like that's the best strategy. The best thing you can do is to play satellites. So I was curious, and I talked with Ray about it. He spoke highly of you and your tips and strategies. He basically introduced me to a few things, to the basics, because I was so keen. I wanted to know more, of course. And I just can agree. I think if you know what to do with satellites, this can really boost your win rate significantly. So for those who don't know what satellites are, maybe you can give them a little introduction about this topic and also why they're so profitable.
So satellites were invented basically by the World Series just to get more people into the World Series main event. And the idea is that you play a satellite tournament to the main event. So the buy-in for the main event is 10,000 and they all pay in $1,000 each. And if 100 of them enter, then there's a prize pool of 100,000. But instead of the normal way in a tournament where you would get like 25,000 for first, 15 for second, and so on down, you just give the last 10 people who survive a seat in the main event. So you have 10 prizes of equal value. The fact that the prizes are of equal value, that changes the strategy right from the start of the tournament, but particularly at the end of the tournament, because when you're playing a normal tournament, you're trying to win the tournament essentially, and to win the tournament, you have to end up with all the chips. Every chip stack that everybody starts with sitting in front of them has to end up in your stack, and then you've won the tournament. But in a satellite, you just have to be there at the end. And it doesn't matter how big your stack is. You could have one chip in front of you, or you could have half the chips in play, but you get the same prize. When I started playing them, the reason I started playing them was that almost no professionals play them online. There's going to be softer because of that. And then I quickly realized that people were just playing them completely wrong. Even as professionals started coming into them, they just played them the same way they played a normal tournament. As you found out a bit from Ray, they're totally different. It always surprised me that people can't kind of work out quicker, more intuitively or instinctively what the differences would be. Because I always say that, like, if we had a tournament, this is a ghoulish example, so I apologize in advance. But if we turned up at a tournament and they locked all the doors and they said, okay, we're going to play a tournament now, but instead of a prize fund, the first 90 people to be knocked out of this tournament are going to be killed, and the remaining 10 will let them go. I can pretty much guarantee most people would play close to the correct strategy right from the start. They wouldn't be taking risks. They would be just trying to survive. And when it comes to 11 or 12 left and they have a big stack, they wouldn't be playing at all. They'd be just waiting for the tournament to end. And with a medium stack, they'd be they wouldn't be taking risks for all their chips. But put them in the same tournament and tell them 10 WSOP tickets for the winners, and the rest of you get nothing, and they play it completely differently. But yeah, the strategy is completely different. It's all just about survival. Now there is a newer format which has come on the scene, the target stack satellite, which has changed that to some degree, not completely, because there's two versions. The American version, they take all the chips out of play every time somebody reaches a target, which means that you don't have enough chips left in the tournament or the number of seats. So it turns into a normal satellite or a traditional satellite at the end. But yeah, the traditional satellite format is just you survive till the end and you win a prize. And that completely warps the strategy then, because it's really just about survival. It's not about chip accumulation.
I want to start first with the key ideas and maybe also some mistakes, because the key idea, as you already said, right? You want to survive, basically. It's not that the winner takes it all. It's, let's say we have 10 tickets. So basically the first 10 get the same price.
Yeah. Yeah. So to talk about how it applies at different stages of a tournament, like sometimes people think, oh, well, yeah, okay, if it's near the bubble and I already have a seat locked up because I have lots of seat, then I'll just fold. And that's my strategy. And, when I wrote the book on satellites with Barry, we deliberately chose an image of somebody folding aces. Just to make the point that often in a satellite, that's correct. I think people can get that part, but they don't necessarily understand that, like, even early on in the tournament, it affects your strategy. If you think about the fact that you're just trying to survive, then you should play lots of different situations differently. Like, you shouldn't be happy to get it in flipping, for example. You shouldn't be happy to take very close spots. Essentially what it really boils down to is you're just trying to lower variance as much as possible. You're trying to win lots and lots of small pots, play lots and lots of small pots. And if you have to play for all the chips, you want to have a fairly big edge. You don't want it to be 50-50. You want it to be at least 55-45, maybe 60-40. when it's for all your chips. And that just affects how you play a whole range of hands. Like, for example, ace king suited. A lot of the value of ace king suited not comes just when you hit your ace or your king, but when you hit, two overcards and a flush draw. How are you going to play that? Probably aggressively. You're going to try and get the chips in first. If you hit, you're going to double up. And a satellite, it might be different. In a satellite, you might not be happy to get it in effectively flipping, because if you get it in pair against two overcards and a flush draw, it is essentially a flip, and you're trying to avoid flips. Not just the obvious flips like tens versus ace king, but also those types of flips. So that completely changes the strategy, which we went into in detail in our book. Late on, though, the strategy just gets completely and utterly warped. There are spots where you literally can't call anything. To take a simple example, if there are 10 seats in a satellite and there are 11 players left, and they all have roughly the same stack, 10 out of the 11 are going to get seats. So that means everybody, just as the dealer is pitching the cards, everybody at that stage has a 91% chance of winning a seat. Only one person's going to miss out. So if somebody shoves all in, you have to be a 91% favorite to call. Guess what? Nothing's a 91% favorite, not even aces. So the strategy gets completely and utterly changed. And that starts to happen, even earlier when say there are 30 left and 10 seats. The strategy starts to change where, you might have a very strong hand, like ace king, not to get too technical, but a hand like ace king, if you're dealt ace king in late position and the stacks are relatively shallow, the way you would typically play it in a normal tournament is you would raise and you would hope somebody else 3-bets or goes all in, and then you'll call. And you do that because you're trying to get ace queen, ace jack, king queen, all the hands that you're in great shape against. In a satellite near the bubble, you would never do that, because getting ace king in against pocket twos is a disaster. It's a 50-50. Even getting ace king in against ace queen or ace jack might not be great, because you're still going to lose 30% of the time. So what happens is you just start shoving ace king for a lot of chips in those spots, and it all comes down to the fact that all of the prizes are equal. There's no bonus prize for having more chips than anybody else. So yeah, it's really just about survival, and you have to think about what is most likely to get me to survive. It might even be the case that if you're completely locked up for a seat and you're dealt ace king, you just fold. You don't even bother shoving it, because you don't want to if somebody calls you, it's an absolute disaster. So there's a lot of strategic nuance to satellites, which, when I started playing satellites and other professionals knew I was playing satellites, they're like, why are you playing satellites? They're stupid tournaments. People didn't recognize the strategic nuance to them. Now they do. And I think it's also one area where non-professionals can do very well. Like you mentioned, Ray. I've been working with Ray for over 5 years now, and he is my favorite model student, because he's the perfect example of somebody who used to be absolutely terrible at poker, and then through hard work and good mindset as well, has gotten better and better. I distinctly remember I was sitting in this chair the very first time I ever spoke to Ray on Zoom, and his first words out of his mouth were, "I'm a terrible poker player and I'll always be terrible." That might not be a great mindset, and it's not the mindset he has now, but it's a much better mindset than, "Oh no, I think I'm pretty good at poker. I just want you to make me slightly better." He was terrible. He needed to learn a lot of stuff technically. But because he was starting from the place of humility, he was open to be able to learn all that stuff. And I think that's what holds back a lot of people too. Sometimes I start coaching people, and almost every coaching session is just an argument. They're telling me how they play a hand, and I tell them how they should have played the hand, and they're arguing that no, that's not the way. It's the way I played it was fine, but I was unlucky, or there were these other factors, or something. And it's impossible to coach somebody like that. They're not going to get any better unless they get past that idea of like, well, I already know everything. I just want to be told that I'm great, and then I'll start crushing.
Exactly, which is also linked back to the first part that we had a conversation about mindset. We see that no matter which format we play, mindset is one of the key essentials, definitely. I want to ask you something that I'm very curious about. This question just popped into my mind. Let's say someone comes to you, he plays MTTs, and let's say he has good mindset, good fundamentals, understanding of strategic way of playing poker. And he asks you, what would you recommend is the optimal split between buying directly into a tournament or playing satellites? How would you split it? What would you recommend?
It's a question I used to get asked a lot. When I was asked first, I found it difficult to unpack in my mind, because I believe the right answer is you have to just see every satellite as a separate tournament. And yes, it's linked to this other tournament in the form that like that's the prize. But people used to ask me, for example, like how many satellites would you play before you'd stop trying to qualify for that tournament? And the question made no sense to me because I was like, well, I would just keep playing, assuming I have an edge in the satellites. The satellite is always going to be professional. It doesn't matter if I've already played 20 of them and I've bricked them. I'm not getting those 20 buy-ins back by not playing. The next one presumably is plus EV for me as well. So I'll keep playing that. I guess my short answer would be just play as many satellites as you can. Like if back in the day when I specialized in satellites online, you were able to qualify for the same event, as many times as you could. And Stars gave you extra tournament dollars. So, like there was one year I qualified for the Irish Open, I think 23 times, and I used one or two of those myself. And then the other 21 changed into tournament money that I was able to use to buy into normal online tournaments. So I always just saw that as like, that's just one area that I play. And then I go and play the live event, but they're not in my mind linked. If the satellite is profitable, I will play the satellite. The only reason why I would not play the satellite is some events don't allow you to qualify more than once. Once you've won your first one, you have to stop. But if I was allowed to keep playing them and, be compensated in some form for unused seats, then I would keep playing them as much as possible. Because in my mind, they're just two different things. It's the fact that the target tournament is the prize for the satellite doesn't really matter. I just think of it in terms of equity. If I qualify for the World Series main event, I just think, well, that's 10 grand. That's, I was going to pay that anyway. I guess there's another aspect to it too, which is bankroll management. What if you want to play something like the main event and you've tried a few satellites and you haven't got in? Would you buy in? Like I personally would buy in because my bankroll is big enough to justify playing the main event, even if I haven't qualified through a satellite. I think this is an area where there's a difference between a professional and a recreational as well. If you're a professional, you have to adhere to the normal rules of bankroll management and just decide whether you are rolled for the tournament. Not necessarily for the tournament. Like very few people are actually rolled for the World Series main event, because if you did the calculations, I think you probably need a bankroll of something like 5 million. And I can guarantee you most professionals who play the World Main Event do not have 5 million. But it's okay because it's a one-off. It's once a year. It's not like you're going to be playing it every day over and over again and you might run up a loss of 5 million. That's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to play it enough times in your life. So as a professional, there's a bankroll decision. As a recreational or amateur, it's really just like, can you afford it? In my mind, the difference between a recreational and a professional is the professional has a bankroll. They have to protect their bankroll. And if they lose their bankroll, they've lost their job. But the recreational doesn't have a bankroll. They have a budget. They have a certain amount of money that they're willing to devote to their passion, their hobby, their pastime. And, if the 10 grand isn't going to make much difference to your life and you're going to greatly value the experience you're going to get out of it, whether you cash or not, then by all means, buy in, even if you've already fired a few satellites.
I like that answer. It's a very good one. And makes a lot of sense, actually. Second to last question. You probably know that I'm very interested in live poker, live tells, because it also has a lot to do with psychology. And that's why I'm so interested in analyzing people on the live poker table. But for you personally, do you think there's a difference between an online satellite and a live poker satellite? Or is it basically the same? What do you think?
No, there's definitely a difference. And it is the physical information that's available live. There also are some differences in the type of player who plays both. As a general rule, not just in satellites, online is a bit tougher than live, because the type of player who, has a computer, knows how to deposit on a site, goes to the trouble of doing that, and goes to the trouble of registering an online tournament. There's a sort of a higher bar of entry there than just wandering into your local casino and playing a satellite, or showing up at the Irish Open and playing a live satellite. So the players tend to be at least slightly better online. And then there's just the physical stuff. And with the physical stuff, in my experience, there's almost a direct correlation between how experienced players are and how much information they give away. Most experienced recreationals give away little or no information these days. If they play 2 or 3 times a week and they're doing that 50 days a year, even if they started out with some fairly obvious tell, they'll either figure it out on their own, or somebody will just say to them at this point, look, I'm going to save you a lot of money here. When you stare at the board, you've missed the flop or whatever. So they kind of eradicate that. But in live satellites, you get very inexperienced players. You get guys who are literally just coming in, taking a shot at qualifying for the Irish Open or the World Series, and maybe they only play 3 or 4 times a year, and those players give away a huge amount of information. Also, you can't rule out online tells completely either. Like, this is a much neglected area, I think. But there are certain online tells. A lot of them have to do with bet sizing, obviously. But a lot of players use one size when they're bluffing, either big or small, and the opposite one when they're value betting. And you can pick that up online if you're paying attention. There's also speed tells. some people bet very quickly when they're bluffing. Some people bet very slowly because they're trying to make it look like they have a decision. When you bet and they call very quickly, that does weight them towards draws. If they had a very, very strong hand, they'd have to think, should I call or should I raise? And if they have a very weak hand, they have to think, ooh, should I call or should I fold? But when they have a draw, they just think, oh, I can call here. And so they call quickly. So there's quite a lot of information if you're paying attention. A lot of the time, I'm not paying that much attention because I'm playing too many tables online to notice. But specifically when I am playing satellites for something like the World Series or the Irish Open, I do try to focus more on that table and pick up those timing tells. And there's other stuff as well. Like if you've never seen a player before, they're probably a fairly inexperienced player. If you recognize their screen name, like I know I've raised screen names at this stage, you're up against a more experienced player. And I remember writing in an article years ago, I was half joking about it, but I was talking about screen name tells. If somebody has a very vainglorious screen name like I'm the best or I'm a pro or something like that, they tend not to be great players because, again, it's psychology. They're ego driven. Ego in poker is a bad thing if it's not backed up with hard work and lots of knowledge. Similarly, people who have all cap screen names, these are often people who are, again, it's ego driven. They want to stand out in some way. Or if they have, whereas, the best players tend to be people who have just really boring screen names, like the first four letters of their real name or something, because they're thinking about the right things. They're not thinking about like, oh, what screen name will I pick that people will think I'm brilliant? They're just focused on like, I just need a screen name and then I'll get better. So there's a lot of information online as well, which I think people often don't pick up on.
I like this one a lot. I didn't really think about this one, but it's a good one, and I will pay a lot of attention to the screen names in the future. Really, really cool. Last question before I let you go. Is there anything you want to share or you want to mention before I let you go?
Yeah, as I mentioned, like in recent years, I've been doing more and more coaching, and it got to the point where I kind of felt I was doing more of it than I wanted to do. Last year, I played less online poker than in any other year of my career. Online poker is still my favorite thing to do. So as much as I enjoy coaching, and it is very rewarding. It's very rewarding when you take somebody like Ray from where he was 5 or 6 years ago to where he is now. I mean, Ray plays better than most professionals do. But at the same time, it can be just the same thing over and over again. As I've gotten better at it, I've kind of figured out the best path to take people through the technical stuff. So it can be a situation where at least half the students that I take on, I am just giving them the same 20 lessons in roughly the same order over and over again. So last year I said this to Barry, the guy that I write the books with, Barry Carter. And I said, what I want to do is I want to put out a video course of those 20 lessons so that in future, when that type of player comes to me and I recognize that that's what they need, they can just watch the videos rather than me have to go through the same thing again for the 10th time this year and the 100th time in my life. That was the idea behind our new site, simplifiedpoker.com. We started with this one course, Tournament Poker Study Simplified, which is basically the approach that I always take with coaching people who want to learn tournaments from a fairly low level, taking them through all the important stuff. And the idea is that in those 20 hours, they learn all of the major important topics like what ranges they should be opening, how they should be playing post-flop, ICM, exploits, all that stuff. But at the end of it, not only do they know that, but now they know how to study and they know how to improve themselves technically, how to use the solvers optimally rather than just doing what most people do, which is to feed in their own hands and see if the solver agrees or not. That's a terrible way to use solvers. A solver should be a microscope, not a library. You're not looking up a bank of solutions to see if you played something correct. You're using to investigate different strategies and how they work out in practice. So we started with that course. We've also put up a course now on post-flop ICM. We mentioned target stack satellites, the new form of satellite. It looks like it's going to take over, to be honest. All of the major live operators are using them now. Some of the online sites have started using them as well. So I suspect in a few years, we're not going to see traditional satellites anymore. Everything will be target stack. We can't even agree on what the name of them are at the moment. We call them target stacks. Some people call them milestones, landmarks, but the idea is the same. You're trying to get to a certain target stack, and if you get there, that's it, you won your seat and you're taken out of a tournament. That changes the strategy a bit differently as well. So we added a chapter to our book on satellites, and we did this course. We have other smaller courses on mystery bounties, new formats in general. That's all at simplifiedpoker.com, which we launched late last year. Even if you don't want to pay money for a thing, One thing I'm always keen on is there's actually a lot of recreational players out there. They're not going to take it seriously enough that they're going to actually pay money for a training site or a coach or anything like that, but they still want a little bit of content. So we have a free newsletter. Everything in our newsletter is strategy. It's not just telling you to buy our course. Every single newsletter that goes out has a clearly understandable, actionable, strategic concept that you can immediately put into practice in your game. And that's actually been the part of the site that we're proudest of. Like, lots of people have come back and said, yeah, I'm on all these other newsletters, but to be honest, they don't really add any value. But every newsletter I get from you, it does have something I can use immediately. So, you can sign up for a free newsletter and you never have to pay a cent to us for that. That will always remain free. Simplifiedpoker.com is the site. And we're already thinking about the other types of courses we want to add on there, not just in terms of what I can add myself, but possibly down the line we'll get other coaches in. I've always been honest with my students. I know the stuff that I'm good at. If somebody comes to me and asks me to coach them in something which I don't feel I'm qualified to, I'll always refer them to somebody else. Mindset is one of those areas. Cash games, I've never played high stakes cash games either, so I wouldn't try to coach anybody for that stuff. But as the site grows bigger, we would like to add content in those areas. So we'd be thinking about who we could possibly collaborate with as well.
Sounds good. I will definitely put the link down below. Of course, also your social media, because I think you also put great stuff on Facebook, Instagram. I always see your post. So I will link everything down below.
That's great.
And who knows, if you look for a mindset coach, maybe I can.
Absolutely. You'll be top of my list on that stuff. And Ray speaks very, very highly of you. And Ray, as I'm sure you know, is a no bullshit person. He always says exactly what he thinks. And just to wrap it up, like, Ray is older than I was when I started, and he's still progressing tremendously. He's an example of somebody who, despite his age, is not bogged down in an ingrained belief system. He's always willing to come in and start to say, yeah, I don't know this, I need to learn it. And that's the crucial thing. The day we think we know everything is the day we basically stop improving and stop growing as a person.
Exactly. I think that's perfect last words for this podcast episode. Was a very interesting one. Thank you so much for jumping on here, Dara. And yeah, we talk soon.
Great. Thanks a lot, Karim.